We are back again with another episode of the King's Information Network podcast, working our way through Book 2, Confronting the Past. And we are up to Chapter 16 of 23, basically. So we are getting there, getting up to the main conflict. So let's keep right on going. Chapter 16. Paul crouched with Sorin and Colin outside the crowded courtyard. He tried to peer through them and shook his head. I can't see a thing from out here. Malone is fighting someone, but I can't tell who or why. I'm going to join the crowd and see what I can see. He stood, but Sorin put a hand on his shoulder to pause him. Wait, we'll come too. What? I thought we didn't want to get caught, Colin protested. Sorin looked amused. Despite your infamous status, Colin, most people won't recognize you on sight. You're actually rather ordinary looking. He grinned as Colin stuck his tongue out at him childishly. Plus, they all seemed quite intent on the spectacle and not any movement by people outside the circle. What about you? Colin asked. People might recognize you. I'm mostly dead. Even if someone gets a glimpse of me and recognizes me, who's going to believe them when they claim Sorin Dakamar was watching the fight? Paul jolted, eyeing him more closely for a moment. Sorin ignored him. Colin absorbed that and snickered. You know, that almost makes the whole idea worth it. To surprise the snot out of some poor sucker. Are you supposed to be this bloodthirsty? Paul asked, immediately distracted. Colin grinned before straightening, brushing off his pants, and striding confidently towards the tight-knit circle of Malone's supporters. As Sorin predicted, no one played the three newcomers any mind. They veered over and around shoulders to get a good look. That's Malone, Paul murmured, nodding towards the quick-moving man on the right. And that's Zeke, he said, sounding surprised. Zeke? He's Cal's second. The teen drooped slightly, but I doubt that'll be for much longer, though. There's Morgan and Russ, Colin said quietly, gesturing with his head. That's Matt with them, Paul confirmed. Sorin grimaced. They're all looking a bit worse for wear. Russ's wound was obvious even from the distance, emphasized by the dried blood on his bare chest. Morgan had a large bruise taking up one side of her face, and blood splattered across most of her. Matt had a tight bandage around his upper arm, as well as vivid bruises on his face. They'll be okay until we can get to them, Colin said firmly. Sorin nodded and leaned forward. Hey, we just got back from duty. What's happening? He asked from the man standing directly in front of them. Boss challenged Zeke to a fair duel. Winner gets to walk away without repercussion, he said without glancing back to see who he might be talking to. How much have we missed? Only the first few feints. No blood yet, he added, sounding disappointed. Colin clenched his fist and favored the back of the man's head with a nasty glare. Shouldn't be long before the boss beats him, eh? Sorin continued. Nah, but Zeke is one of the best, the man said. He'll give him a bit of a challenge. I suppose that's what he wants, before he tackles Darcy. Will he give Darcy a fair duel like this, do you think? Sorin asked, as Paul covered a smile at the man's obliviousness. The situation as a whole was serious, but this man was practically trying not to care. Doubtful. The boss has his own score to settle with Darcy. Everyone knows that. Yeah, just wondering. We all know how he values his pride on these things, Sorin said, taking an educated guess. That's true. Guess we'll have to wait and see. It's Darcy over there, did you know? The man asked, pointing, still not bothering to do more than glance briefly in Sorin's general direction. Really? Doesn't look like much to me. Bet the boss could take him no problem if he wanted. That's what we think too, but the boss is pretty wary of him, so I suppose there must be a reason. Thanks for catching us up, friend, Sorin said, keeping his tone light and friendly. Colin smirked. Not a problem. Been in your position before, mate. Sorin stepped back and looked at Paul seriously. Does Zeke stand a chance? He asked. I don't think so, the teen said, sobering. Chris is the best, other than Russ, supposedly. But Zeke is pretty good, so maybe he'll get lucky and solve half of our problem for us. We need to get you doing more active work, Colin muttered to Sorin. He shrugged with half a smile. He could handle this, but they both knew he was better working behind the scenes. They watched the fight as the combatants feinted and counter-feinted. Zeke drew first blood, but Chris followed it up quickly with a nasty gash to the other man's face. It was then that their informative friend spoke up again. Where'd you say you were on duty again, mate? He asked absently. Sorin looked towards Paul and Colin, and as one, they faded back into the fog, which was helpfully descending again. Hey, what? Where'd you go? Sorin heard the question, but couldn't see him, already in the fog, headed back towards Weaver territory. They're still alive, Sorin told Shannon, as he finished being tackled by Dean and hugging his son back tightly. She nodded. Matt too? She asked hopefully. Yes. And they're all beaten to various degrees from what we could see. You saw them? Yes, Malone was dueling Zeke, Cal's second, Paul reported. Shannon sighed. Cal came to tell me while you were gone. He's not happy with the lack of movement. I didn't dare tell him that Russ has been captured for fear of losing his support. Although that isn't something I think we can hide forever. I'll tell him, Colin said. Hopefully hearing it from the continued kin presence will worry him less than hearing it from you, and keep you in his good graces for when we need him. Do you think we can move the diversion and attack up at all? Shannon asked. Sorin frowned thoughtfully. It is possible. I don't want our people any more harmed than they already are, if at all possible. Mostly because I want them out of Malone's clutches, but also because the more hurt they are, the harder it'll be to get them out, especially if they can't do it under their own power. Shannon shook her head. You can be frighteningly cold and calculating, Sorin. It was something I've been taught most of my life, he said with a small smile, trying not to feel guilty. It unfortunately serves me quite well, even now working for kin. It is useful, Colin agreed. Come on, it's getting late and we should get back to the house. Shannon, can you arrange a meeting between Lieutenant Johnson, Cal, Rain, and I? I'd like to fill them in on our concrete plan tomorrow afternoon so we can strike the following night. She nodded. I don't know if Rain will come, but I'll get the others. Shannon looked between them. You two know what you're doing, right? Colin grinned. We both helped organize the overthrow of a government. Overthrowing Christopher Malone is simple in comparison. There was a pause as she stared at him. Was that supposed to make me feel better? Of course, we have experience on our side. Shannon eyed him. Colin grinned and bowed slightly. You've been spending far too much time around my sister, Sorin groaned. Let's go, Colin. Dean. Dean giggled and waved to Paul, who was trying to stifle laughter. Colin winked before waltzing out the door. Sorin barely bit back another groan as he steered his son out the door after him. Your sister is fun, Colin said, as Sorin and Dean caught up to him outside. I see no problem here. My sister is a lot. But fun, Dean added. Doesn't mean Colin needs to act like her, Sorin said in amusement. Yeah, well, you haven't lived in fairly close proximity with her, Bri, and Jay, Sorin, Colin told him dryly. It tends to make even the sanest people a bit wacky in a good way. They made their way back through the darkening streets, Dean yawning. Dad, Russ is going to be okay, right? Morgan and his friend Matt, too? Well, we're going to do our very, very best, Dean. I want you to promise me now that when we go to free them, you'll stay where I tell you and won't try to follow us. He sighed. Dad, how am I going to get any experience if you won't let me do anything? He asked, a bit of a whine creeping into his voice. Sorin looked down at him, wondering, not for the first time, if he was doing the right thing by Dean. Raising him in a house full of kin talk and training, not to mention the homeschooling. I do let you do things, Sorin told him gently, but you're only 10, Dean. There's no reason you'd seen any bloodshed at your age. Honestly, I wish you could go your whole life without it, but I know you have your heart set on joining kin, and I wouldn't dream of stopping you. But if there was somewhere for you to go, I wouldn't have brought you. He debated taking him to the castle, but the extra day or two of travel would have been potentially dangerous. But you had to come help Russ. You told me that already, Dad. But I can help too. Really, I promise. Sorin stopped and squatted down in front of his son, putting his hands on his shoulders and looking him straight in the eye. You're very talented and good at so many things already, Dean. But I'm not going to risk losing you or even getting hurt. You are my son. My job is to protect you, and that's what I'm going to do to the very best of my abilities for as long as I possibly can. Part of that means keeping you well away from battles until you're significantly older. Colin had slipped away to give them space, and while Sorin didn't mind his friend's presence, he was glad for the moment with Dean. Dean rubbed his eyes fiercely, clearly fighting back tears. But I want to help, Dad. I don't want you getting hurt again or leaving me. Sorin pulled him forward into a tight hug. I won't leave you, Dean. At least not until you're grown and have kids of your own. By then, I'll be really old, and I'll sit your kids on my knee and tell them about all the amazing things you've done. The boy sniffed, burying his head in his father's shoulder. What about all the amazing things you've done? He smiled, closing his eyes as he held his son. I'll leave that to you, okay? Dean nodded. Promise me, Dad? I promise. And you promise me you'll stay where you're told when we attack in 2 days. I promise. Sorin pushed him back and kissed him on the nose, causing Dean to giggle through his tears. I'm not 6 anymore, Dad. That's just silly now. Sorin chuckled, straightening. And it wasn't silly then? No, it was fun then. But now I'm getting big and grown up, so it's silly. Sorin ruffled his hair affectionately. You're always going to be my son, Dean, and therefore I'm entitled to being a little silly sometimes, okay? Dean hugged him quickly. See, you are related to Annie, he said slyly. Sorin snorted. Of course I am. The rest of the walk was uneventful, while Sorin shooed Dean off to bed once they arrived, while Colin flopped onto the couch, rubbing his face with his hands. Damn it, he was muttering as Sorin returned. Damn what? Sorin asked mildly. I never should have sent Morgan into Greyspire. You didn't know any better. I should have. That's my job, Colin said, frowning as he rubbed harder. Everyone makes mistakes. I made one this morning when I consciously allowed Russ to go into Malone's territory without completely thinking it through. She's a kid, though. She's a trained agent. You and I worked up the training together. By all accounts, she's a tough one. Morgan will survive, like Russ. Everyone has tough times. Yours were when you were trying to keep Ben alive, Dean's when he was on his own, and yours when you were a child, Colin said quietly, glancing at him. Sorin frowned. He always forgot how much Colin knew. He'd told Russ much of it over the years, but had never had to tell Colin as he'd ferreted most of it out before they'd ever met the first time. Yes, he said after a moment. Colin smiled slightly. I promise I haven't dug more, but I picked things up between you and Annie. You both dropped more than I think you realize. Dean and I have never talked about it, he said slowly. He's smart, so I'm sure he's at least figured out that our childhood was awful, but I don't want him to know more yet. He's still young. Colin nodded. I understand. He won't hear a thing from me. That's something he'll need to hear from you one day. Thank you. I might not be a father, but I have one. He grinned. Hey, Sorin. Yeah? I'm glad you lived. Sorin raised an eyebrow. Gee, thank you ever so much, Colin. His smile widened. No, seriously, I am. Tara would have lost a very important person and asset if things had gone differently. I'm not sure I would feel as safe. Now you're getting sappy, Sorin said, rolling his eyes, although he was highly amused by Colin calling him an asset. He hoped the other man would never change. Yeah, well, you said I was channeling Annie. She gets sappy quite often. Annie is pretty much all sap, but it works for her. It doesn't work as well for you. Colin shrugged, smiling slyly. Yes, but it does work for you, Sorin, which is why you're a great father. That's not, Sorin began blinking, but Colin had already stood and stretched. I'm going to bed, he said, ignoring him completely and heading for the stairs, leaving Sorin staring after him. Sorin frowned as he rubbed the bridge of his nose. There was no point trying to analyze Colin. One of the things he liked most about him was that he didn't easily fit into a category, like most of the other heroes of the freedom fighters. He took Colin's seat on the couch, eyeing the maps and notes all over the table. He had to hope their plan was as close to infallible as possible, because he was pretty sure more than Russ, Morgan, and Matt's lives depended on it being perfect. There would be a lot of fighting during the diversion, and he hoped the upcoming loss of life would be worth it. It was so hard to quantify human life. Sorin sent out a silent wish that Russ and Morgan would be okay, like he kept insisting, and let his brain battle against sleep as usual. In the morning, Sorin was the last one up, but he'd also long been the last one to bed. He joined Colin and Dean for breakfast. Thanks, Dean, he told his son, recognizing the breakfast. Welcome, he said. Figured I'd put being first up to good use. Colin yawned again. Mind telling me how you managed to stay up and not be sleepy the next day? He asked Sorin. It'd be a useful skill to have. Sorin filled a plate and chuckled. Many long years of practice, Colin. You might get there someday. Yeah, when my joints are creaky and my bones crumble from trying to pick up a spoon, he said dryly. Dean giggled. Will you still be the head of kin when that happens, Colin? He asked. Nah, I'll hand it off to some young whippersnapper, he said with a wink, and then made a show of eyeing Dean. You know, you'll still be pretty young and spry by then. What do you think? Dean Dacamar, head of kin? Dean smirked. Well, obviously, he said. Colin burst out laughing. Perfect, then. Done and done. Sorin smiled, shaking his head. But he didn't doubt Dean would, in fact, take over kin someday if he wanted to. The boy beamed proudly. You think so? You'd make a great head of kin once your dad, Russ, and I get old and creaky. Russ is going to get old and creaky last. Sorin made a sour face. Don't remind us. What do you think, Sorin? We might have to help Russ along a bit? Sorin nodded, straight-faced. Definitely. Don't be silly. You can't help someone get old and creaky. We could try. Bet it wouldn't work, the boy shot back, grinning. Russ wouldn't let you anyway. Colin wrinkled his nose. Now that is true, he conceded. Russ can kick my butt when it comes to most fights. He is good. One of the best, Sorin put in. Just then, there was a knock on the door. Colin glanced at Sorin before slipping out of his chair and heading for the main room. Sorin and Dean were right on his heels. Who is it? Colin called. It's Shannon. He let out a breath and unlocked the door. Come in. The woman pushed open the door and smiled briefly at the three before focusing on Colin. Cal, Rain, and Johnson have all agreed to a meeting around noon. Cal's loaded for bear, though. I should warn you. She sighed. Zeke was found inside his territory this morning with his throat slashed. Sorin's expression went somber. So he lost. I was afraid he would. Malone's men seemed far too confident for me to have much hope. His arm slipped around his son protectively. Dean's eyes were wide at this piece of news. Would you like breakfast, Shannon? Colin asked, lacking anything better to say. Her gaze shifted back to him, and she laughed slightly. No, thank you, Colin. I've already ate. I should get back anyway. Should I meet you here or at the fountain? I can get myself to the fountain. I'll meet you just before noon. She nodded. I'll see you soon. She flashed another quick smile at the other two before vanishing back out the door. Colin ran a hand through his hair as he nudged the door shut and turned to face the others. I say we make a pact to do our very best to finish this before another life is wasted. It wasn't your fault, Colin, Sorin said softly. We all take responsibility for things, Sorin, and I took responsibility of keeping the damn country safe for people to live in, he said roughly, and I'm failing. Dean frowned before breaking from Sorin's side and running over to hug Colin around the middle. Colin, you're not going to be able to save everybody all the time. It's not how the world works. Even I know that. So it's stupid for you to try and be responsible for everyone. Sorin nodded. Dean's right, Colin. Tierra's a very safe place to live. Much safer than either Neris or Alia, and probably a lot of other countries as well. And what you're doing now? You're helping make Greyspire safe. Colin opened his mouth, having automatically wrapped his arms around the boy, but Sorin cut him off. And don't say you should have done it years ago. Both Russ and I have known about the state of Greyspire for years, so that means we hold more culpability than you. Then, of course, there's the good Duke, a bit of sarcasm snuck in at those words, who is always known and chooses to do nothing. Sorin remembered Duke Carlisle and had never thought much of him. Duke Carlisle is getting on in age. He probably doesn't even remember Greyspire after long years of ignoring it, Colin agreed dryly, and took a deep breath. Okay, I'm sorry. He rubbed his face quickly. I don't do waiting. I'm not sure many of us do this kind of waiting well, Sorin said with a shrug. It'll work out in the end, Colin. He grinned briefly. These things tend to. Colin managed to smile back. Yeah, I know. I'd better go figure out what the hell I'm going to say to Cal and how I'm going to convince Rain she really needs to help us. Damn, makes me wish Russ was still here. No, you're going to finish breakfast, and then we'll figure it out together, Dean said firmly, before shoving Colin back towards the kitchen. The leader of kin started laughing as he allowed himself to be pushed. He winked at Sorin. Guess that solves that problem, huh? Sorin looked amused. Guess so, he said.